How can a man work for a council for 30 years, live in a council-owned home for decades, and still face eviction at the end of his employment? That is the question at the centre of a case involving a former school caretaker in Brent. The employee, an elderly army veteran, worked at a primary school in the borough for around 28 years while living in accommodation linked to his role. According to reports, his 1996 contract stated that housing would be provided as part of his employment. He says he believed that if he ever had to leave the property, the council would rehouse him. But Brent Council says the policy changed years ago. The council states that priority rehousing for former service tenants only applies to employees with qualifying service before August 1990. Because this employee's contract began in 1996, the council says he no longer meets the criteria for rehousing. The employee and his union dispute that position. They argue the original agreement created an expectation that after decades of public service, he would not simply lose his home. The union also claims he was never properly notified about changes to the rehousing policy. Brent Council says the housing position was carefully reviewed and that support was offered through the homelessness service. The employee was advised to make a homelessness application so his circumstances could be assessed under homelessness legislation. And in terms of housing rights, this case highlights something many tenants do not realise. Not every long-term tenancy gives the same level of housing security. Where accommodation is tied to employment, landlords can seek possession once that employment ends. Accommodation that comes with a job is sometimes called tied accommodation. It means you live somewhere that the employer provides. The employee usually has either basic protection from eviction or an assured tenancy. An employee has basic protection from eviction if either they must live in the accommodation to do their job, or the employment contract says they must live there to do their job properly. This is sometimes called being a service occupier. Examples of service occupiers can be hotel or pub employees who live on the premises, caretakers, gardeners or housekeepers who live in or near their workplace. Basic protection gives fewer rights than an assured tenancy or secured tenancy. An employee can be evicted more easily if their job ends, but the former employer will need a court order to evict if the employee does not leave when the job ends. To understand Brent Council's legal leverage in this case, we have to look at Schedule 1, Paragraph 2 of the Housing Act 1985. Under normal circumstances, a council tenant receives strong legal protections known as a secure tenancy. However, this specific paragraph creates a strict exemption for tied accommodation or service occupiers. It states that if an employee is required to live on-site for the better performance of their duties as a caretaker, they are legally stripped of secure status as, in this case, when the caretaking job ends, the right to live there ends. Under the Protection from Eviction Act 1977, the council serves a standard 4-week written notice to quit. If they refuse to leave, the council goes straight to court for a possession order without needing to prove a specific statutory breach. Local council tenants hold secure tenancies governed by the Housing Act 1985. The Renters' Rights Act does not rewrite the 1985 Act. What makes this case striking is not simply the legal position. It is the contrast between legal rights and personal circumstances. To many people, living in the same council property for nearly 30 years would feel secure. Most people would assume that after decades of service to a local authority, there would be some long-term housing protection if employment came to an end. But housing security can mean very different things legally depending on the type of tenancy involved. A tenancy linked to employment may never carry the same protections as a traditional long-term council tenancy, even after decades of occupation. Brent Council say the rehousing rules linked to these properties only apply to employees whose contracts predate 1990. That may well be the policy position. Housing security is a basic human need. The Renters' Rights Act replaces the former Ground 16 of the Housing Act 1988 with the new mandatory Ground 5C. This ground applies where a tenancy is linked to a person's employment, and that employment has ended, allowing a landlord to recover possession where the statutory requirements are met. However, Local authority tenants generally fall outside this framework because their homes are usually held under the secure tenancy provisions of the Housing Act 1985, rather than the assured tenancy regime of the Housing Act 1988, meaning different possession grounds and protections apply. That leaves an interesting contrast. At a time when housing security is at the center of political debate, a former Army veteran who worked for the same local authority for almost 30 years is facing the loss of the home he occupied throughout much of that service. Whatever view people take of the legal position, many will feel that raises wider questions about housing security, long service, and what support should be available when employment-linked accommodation comes to an end.